Hi and welcome to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
Week 3. Brought to you by Mannix's Mug. Yes, my parents have the same mug as Joe Mannix. We are recording on location at my parents' house in beautiful Kelowna. So, we watched episode 11 on August 13th. And it started where we left off Friday with Joe trying to get into Channing's room. He put the key that Dominic had given him into the lock and set off an alarm.
And he had nowhere to go once the alarms started ringing.
Right. Kelly came bursting out of her room, which was across the hall, and Joe had managed to hide in a little, I guess, linen closet with some slats in it so he could see through. And Cece and Mason started ordering police and guards, and Philip was running around, and the whole place was being searched, and somehow Peter showed up. And eventually Joe managed to just sneak out a window, jump across the wall, and get out.
I actually would have really expected the Channing place, or the Capwell place, to have a lot more security than it did.
Yeah, it's interesting that Cece actually said that security had not yet arrived. So they must be using an external security company that will come when the alarm goes off.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, of course, Cece's also got this worry about the oil rig the whole time. So that's happening. Joe leaves a message for Dominic after his escape from the Capwell mansion.
Asking for help.
And I guess Mom is up very late at night working on bills because she's still up. And Joe realizes she needs money. So the next day he goes out to try and get a job as a mechanic, which is something he learned in prison.
Doesn't work very well, unfortunately.
No, the guy thinks that no one will want to get their car fixed from a guy who's a murderer. So then, surprisingly, Sally Taylor from high school shows up.
Yeah, that was a bit of an odd scene, I thought.
And offers him a job washing dishes at a restaurant. Which sounds like, a dead cert, but then she goes, I'll ask Luigi or something like that. So I'm not sure. It sounded like she was the owner, but then suddenly she's got to ask Luigi. So we'll see. And Jade arrives at home after a day of trying to get cast, and she is very dejected. No one would hire her, thinks she doesn't have the right look, so she changes her outfit a number of times. Danny tries to compliment her, but she's not really, taking that in, I don't think. And
she's been very organized, much more so than the boys, about trying to find work in Hollywood. She has a list of agents, and she's been looking at magazines to get a good sense of what she needs to look like, and she's been trying to make connections. So she starts off with a sort of blaze of energy, and but I thought was dejected very quickly after one morning
after
of
a very full day of being rejected. So she goes to a payphone to call Lakin and tell her how lousy her day was. And then this really skeezy guy shows up outside the payphone. Says that, he can take her places. So, to be continued.
We'll see how that ends.
Yeah. And then Lakin is very angry with Warren about the same topic. Warren's been spreading it all over town about Joe and their mother, and he says, "You used to be friends with Channing. Why would you spread lies about Mom and the guy who killed Channing?" So anyway, she's really not thinking that her mother's capable of anything like that.
I think she knows deep down that her mom is, but she's really, I thought, a little overly defensive about it.
And Cece suddenly changes his mind about Santana's contract to decorate the hotels.
Mm-hmm.
So that just comes out of nowhere, and obviously he's doing that just because Santana's been asking about Brandon. But she calls his bluff and says, "Oh, I'm willing to have myself withdrawn from the contract and let one of my other, co-workers do the job."
And she says something I thought very telling. She says, I know that I'm too professional to let our personal differences get in the way of our relationship, and I'm surprised that you're not. And that seems to get under CC's skin a little bit, and he relents and signs the contract.
Yeah, and he says, "Okay, she's all yours," and hands her back to Mason and wanders off. Now Mason has now picked up that something is off between CC and Santana. And Santana won't tell him. He tries to get CC to tell him, but he also does not. So Mason knows something is up. So I think he'll be doing some snooping in the future. Meanwhile, on the oil rig, Cruz Castillo has suddenly appeared there. CC had been waiting for him to arrive, and he popped up on the rig magically. And John Perkins was not there to meet him. It was some random oil rig worker.
Yeah.
And Cruz was directing people to go here and there. He finally told the fire crew just to abandon the ship, that he was going to try and set the nitro himself to try and blow out the fire.
Yeah.
And
we see him in a little, I guess, fire retardant suit, trying to do something or other with a pipe to try and fix it, I guess.
Yeah, there seems to be a deadline because he says, "I need to stop it from blowing." So I assume the fire is causing some other equipment to heat up to an extent that there will be some additional type of explosion.
Yeah.
So anyway, he sets the timer, and then the helicopter pilot reports back to Cece that there's been an explosion and the fire's gone out, and they're all wondering, "Oh, did Cruz survive? Did Cruz survive?" Suddenly, the doorbell rings, and there's Cruz. He's made it and somehow swum back to shore.
Yeah.
25,000 miles. So he's there. But then the surprise is Santana, who's been hanging around, stands up, and he recognizes her.
And they obviously have a history.
That is true.
So that's exciting.
So that is where we left things. So we'll find out tomorrow how Cruz and Santana know each other.
Yeah.
We will see you again after we watch episode 12.
See you again.
Bye. Hello and welcome back to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
Brought to you as always by Mannix's Mug. This is episode 12 of Santa Barbara, week 3. And we started watching it on August 14th. Fell asleep and finished it this morning on the 15th. So it started where it ended up with Cruz collapsing in the atrium of the Capwell mansion after having recognized Santana. And they end up taking Cruz to the hospital, and Mason and Santana and Cece spend the day wandering around the hospital,
making
their
awkward
hands.
Conversation because they're all mad at each other.
Cece takes an interview, does an interview with the press at one point, telling them what a great job Cruz did putting out the fire, and he's going to try and make him part of the corporation permanently. So Mason takes the opportunity to tell Cece that he doesn't want a career in politics. Cece's pretty adamant about it. He's not just going to let him get away with that. He says, "Don't you remember when you were 4 or 5? And, I would tuck you into bed at night and we would have our little secret discussion about how you were going to be president someday."
And you can see from Mason's face that he does not remember that.
No, and he says it must have been Channing. Cece's pretty adamant that it was Mason. But Mason says, "Well, you told me I should be a man, and I'm saying I don't want to be a politician at all." Cece says, "Well, when you were a child, you used to be obsessed with the family history, and you memorized the whole family tree, and all the people who, suffered over the years to make this family great. They came from Philadelphia to San Francisco and lost 2 children on the way, and you know all those names." And he just says he doesn't think politics is for him. He says, "Oh, we were going to be like the Kennedys." And and all those families. But Mason's pretty adamant that he does not want to be in politics. So, meanwhile, at the Lockridge house, Augusta caves and says that Lakin can go to Los Angeles, but for one day. So she tells her to drive carefully and not to make any eye contact. And then when Augusta leaves briefly, Warren asks Lakin about Ted, saying, "Oh, can I meet Ted in L.A.?" And, "Oh, how'd you know Ted was in L.A.?" So he says, "Well, there's no secrets at the yacht club." And then Lakin is later seen on a call to Lionel. And after she's chatted with him, she asks Minx if she wants to talk to Lionel. And she goes, "I'll talk to him when he gets home." And not a Catherine Hepburn accent like I just did. But, and then he says, "Oh, I can pass you over to Mom." "Oh, okay, bye." Lionel declines to talk to Augusta. So, yeah, Augusta seems to be fine with that. But then when Lakin leaves, Minx sort of needles her about her husband not wanting to talk to her. And then at one point, Lakin comes back for a purse, and Augusta asks her where Giorgio's is. So somehow she's gotten the word that Giorgio's has offered Joe the job as a dishwasher. And she makes a call to some, I think Wolfie, she called him, some thug, and says that she wants a word with the owner of Giorgio's. So, and then Lakin dreams about Ted.
That was funny.
Yeah, she dreamed about showing up at Ted's apartment, and it was the same set that they used for their apartment. Ted was surrounded by starlets, and as soon as Lakin walked in, he bade them to go away, and they only had eyes for Lakin.
And Santana pays a visit to the private detective who she hired, I think it was an episode before, and who she has just found out has been working for C.C. Capwell the entire time. He's not really been working for her.
So she fires him.
Yeah.
And wants all the money back that she's paid to him already.
Which I think is fair.
And while waiting for Cruz to recover, Mason and Santana talk about Cruz and how the Castillos lived across the street from the Andrades. And then Santana mentions when she was a kid that they moved there from Mexico, which kind of makes sense with Ruben and Rosa's accents, that they were not born in California.
Yes.
But I think that may be in conflict with some stuff I remember from future episodes.
Oh, okay.
We'll see if they find a way to explain why the Andrades were in Mexico. And then Cruz wakes up, and Cece offers him a permanent job at Capital Enterprises. Cruz wonders, do I need to be a hero every day? And Cece says, well, even if you're behind a desk, you're valuable to me. That's well, I need some excitement in my life.
Yeah, I don't think being behind a desk was really that attractive to Cruz. Not like it was to Peter Flint.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting parallel.
That
Peter and Cruz are both kind of
new hires. They might be working together. That'll be interesting.
Different purposes. You know, Cruz says he needs some time to think about it just because he's still a bit dazed from the explosion and the surgery. So, you know, I think he might stick around. Back at the Perkins house, a lot of traffic there today. John and Marissa ran into each other. John came to pick up a toolbox he'd forgotten. And they just talk about Joe and how John says, well, the court found him guilty, so he's guilty.
Yeah, John doesn't have a lot of faith in Joe at all at this point, it seems.
And then Joe and Sally meet to talk about the job that she had offered, and she tells Joe, oh, you know, during your trial, I offered to testify on your behalf. I called your lawyer and said I could tell everyone what a turkey you really were, which I guess was her way of saying he's not a murderer. And she asks if he likes Lionel Richie music, because she has all of his albums, and she invites him to soak in the tub of Lionel Richie that she can prepare for the two of them.
I was actually trying to remember how many solo albums Lionel Richie would have done at this point after leaving the Commodores.
Maybe she was counting some Commodores albums as well.
Yeah, maybe.
But maybe Joe should have said, "No, I prefer Peebo Bryson." he says no.
There's
and
a
she
few
goes,
clunky lines.
"Do you
in
want a
this.
girl?" And he says, "Well, I have a girl."
Yeah.
Kelly Capwell? Still thinking you're going to get back together with Kelly Capwell, but she actually thinks Joe can do it. Like, she's kind of, even though she's been in love with him since high school, obviously, she thinks Joe and Kelly could still make it. So it's interesting to see how that will go. Joe later on goes to meet Dominic and tells the troubles he had at Channing's room, that there was an alarm system. So Dominic obviously didn't know about that, but Dominic says he'll see what he can do about finding a way to circumvent the alarms.
Yes. Yeah. And Joe's not having much luck himself either. The job that he thought he had gotten last week, or last episode, is not panning out quite as well as he had hoped.
Yeah, after Augusta calls the guy from Giorgio's, Sally has to come back to Joe's place and say that she has to rescind the offer because Giorgio said no, we couldn't have a murderer working as a dishwasher. So I think Augusta's plan is that he's going to have to take that job as her handyman.
Yeah, I guess she's aiming for something like that. I mean, Joe doesn't seem very surprised or really broken up. Sally offers him a paycheck for a week's worth because that's what she had promised him. And he does take it, you know. He says, he makes an interesting comment. He says that he knows the honorable thing would be to just tear it up, but he does actually need the money, so he takes the check. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. I think that probably is the motivation that Augusta has.
And then Joe gets a telegram from Dominic
Mm-hmm.
saying that he needs to go to 10650 North Mountain Drive at 11:30 the next morning. No explanation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not their usual meeting place with the spiral staircase. So then in Hollywood, Ted and Danny are watching the Thriller video.
Mm-hmm.
And Jade comes out of the bedroom and kind of interrupts them, but wants to join them. But then the doorbell rings, and it's that creepy Seymour who was kind of stalking her at the phone booth, and she gets Ted and Danny to pretend they're her managers, and he actually buys it and says, "Well, if you ever want to dump these bimbos, here's my card," and he has a business card for his dodgy enterprise.
She had already, last episode, done a fairly good job of defending herself against Seymour by slamming the phone booth door on his hand, so he does still have a wounded hand from that. But I guess he had overheard her giving her address when she was on the phone, so I think that's why he knew where she was.
Mm-hmm. And Kelly and Peter talk throughout about Joe. She's hanging out at his office at Capital Enterprises. And he says, "Oh, you've been kind of moody since Joe showed up," or whatever. And she's like, "Not really." And then he talks about how great he's loving it there, and how he was such a great shoe salesman before, and such a great teacher, but now he really thinks he can be an executive, and he loves his car, and he loves hobnobbing with celebrities. And she's like, "Oh, that's nothing, and that's just how we live." And so she's fine with that. Not like Mason's worry about him just wanting them for their money. I think she's fine.
It is very different though from how Cruz Castile was responding to the same offer though.
Mm-hmm. And then they end up in the parking lot. And there's a note on Kelly's car in the parking lot, and it says that a horse that Cece has always wanted is coming up for auction the next day, and that she should go to 10650 North Mountain Drive at 11:30. So clearly Dominic has written that note as well.
It would appear so.
Dominic knowing a lot about Cece's horse needs somehow. So Dominic's got an interesting set of information about the Capwells. But He knows that Cece's always wanted this horse, but doesn't know that there's an alarm on Shannon's room. So it's kind of interesting. So, and Peter has to work the next day. So it's actually, the timing is good for Dominic to try and set up Kelly and Joe meeting each other, because Peter will not be there.
And that's how the show ends. So it's a little bit of a cliffhanger to see what's going to happen next episode when Kelly goes to her appointment and Joe goes to his appointment. Yeah. And will they meet?
I assume they will. But will Dominic be there too, do you think, spying from afar?
We don't know. And we don't know if Dominic will be there as Dominic or someone else.
Do you think Dominic is a disguise?
It looks like a disguise to me.
You think that beard is not real? And that very deep voice. I don't know. Might be a while before we find out, one way or the other. So we will see you again later after we watch episode 13 of Santa Barbara.
See you later.
Hello and welcome back to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Welcome back.
This is week 3, episode 13. We started watching it on August 15th, fell asleep again, and finished it today on August 16th. And it started with Cece in the hospital with Cruz, showing him the newspaper with his picture on it. Mm-hmm. And then Ruben joins them, and Cece reiterates the job offer, and Ruben and Cruz have a chat about old times since they used to live across the street. And Cruz asks about Danny and Santana, but they also mentioned 2 other Andrade daughters that we've never heard of before. Olivia, who is an intern.
Yep, she's following a medical career.
She lives at home. And Gabriella, who sounds much younger, and obviously also lives at home. So I don't recall either of these people from any of the episodes I saw. And IMDb doesn't show anyone ever played these characters. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is the last time we ever heard of them.
So those are going to be, I guess, the people in the Andrade family who do not lead dramatic enough lives to be part of the Santa Barbara storyline.
Ever be mentioned again. So. And Joe talks to Dominic on the phone after receiving the telegram, and he thinks it's some sort of setup. He doesn't still quite trust Dominic, but Dominic says, you're never going to get what you want if you don't go to the stables, or go to this address. So now Augusta spots that Lakin is packing a bag for her day trip to Los Angeles. She's suspicious about that, but Lakin says she might go to the beach. Mm-hmm. But Augusta's, I think, suspicious the whole time, so...
I actually find the relationship so far between Augusta and Lincoln really fascinating, because Augusta obviously leads an unconventional life in a lot of ways and does what she wants to do. You know, she's obviously a woman with many passions, but she's very, very strict with Lincoln, and she seems to have a very conservative way of raising Lincoln. So I just find that a really interesting thing, that there's such a contrast in the way she lives her life, but also in the way that she expects Lincoln to live her life.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
And it's also a very different approach than she takes to Warren as well.
And I mean, she's obviously hiding whatever she's doing from her kids, or at least from Lincoln. Yeah. And hopefully from Minx too.
But I think it's more than Augusta having self-preservation. I think she seems very, very protective of Lincoln as well.
Mm-hmm. So down south in Los Angeles, Danny and Ted are practicing their karate, which doesn't seem to impress Jade too much. But later they use it to foil a mugger who's mugging one of their neighbors as she's coming home with her groceries. Mm-hmm. And so they end up meeting the neighbor, whose stage name was Peach's Delight when she was a fan dancer back in the day. And so they have a great time hanging out at her place. And then Lakin arrives, and she joins the party upstairs. And then an unexpected scene occurs. Augusta gets a phone call from Peach's Delight, pretending to be the mother of a girl that Lakin's met in L.A. And she says, they've hit it off so well. Couldn't your daughter just stay overnight, at our place? So that's quite hilarious that Peaches is trying to help Ted and Lakin get together. So Augusta agrees, but she sounded suspicious
She
to
was
me.
suspicious.
She thought that it was a
Yeah.
setup. So I don't know if she'll try to send a spy down to LA to figure out what's happened. Or... So yeah, then Peaches is showing them old photos, and she realizes she's hogging their alone time, and she says, "Oh, I got to go to bed," and leaves them alone in her living room, and they have the run of the place and the kitchen. So
And it's much nicer than the apartment that Ted and Danny and Jade share downstairs.
They actually discuss where's Lincoln going to sleep.
Yeah.
Ted said anywhere you want, but really, since they sleep on the kitchen chairs, there's not too many options for her to sleep
and
on.
it's very small.
There's that one couch that we've
Yeah.
seen in the corner that's like almost a love seat size. It wouldn't be fun to sleep on there. So anyway, they watch on the waterfront and just cuddle on the couch. So they seem to have a nice evening.
And I guess we should mention that Peach's Delight is actually played by
Virginia Mayo.
Virginia Mayo, who was a famous actress in her own right back in the day.
Another celebrity cameo for Santa Barbara. Now Mason witnesses an odd interaction with Peter and Santana in Peter's office. Santana's now showing him her swatches. She's making the rounds of everyone at Capwell Hotels with her swatches. But he compliments her on her clothes and her perfume, and Mason wanders out, lets them get on with their work, but then comes back after they're done. And when Santana's left, he warns Peter to stop flirting with other women, and that, as long as you're engaged to Kelly, you better watch your step.
And I actually found Peter's strategy in this very odd because Mason's not wrong in this encounter. The only reason why Peter is given this job and why he's got the kind of authority he does is because he's marrying Kelly. And if he does anything to screw that up, he's not going to have that job or any of that authority. So I found it really odd that he was so openly flirting with Santana and doing so in front of Mason, who is a Capwell and who has a lot more of a stake in the company and in the heart of the family than Peter will ever have.
Mason says, interestingly, that Peter has a less than spotless reputation where women are concerned, so the family's aware of that. He says, you have a lot to lose, Peter. Yeah. And then Peter says that nobody will tell him whose perfume to sniff, including Santana's. So he actually doubles down on that.
Yeah. It just doesn't seem like a winning strategy to me for Peter.
Yeah, I don't know if he thinks Mason doesn't have any power in the family. I think he would be mistaken there.
Yeah.
So Santana, early in the episode, tries to get Rosa to allow her to search for photos of Brandon, and Rosa won't have any of it. She says it's, shouldn't snoop in other people's property. Later, Santana tries to show Cece some swatches, which is odd because he's already handed that whole thing over to Mason, so I think she just wanted an excuse to talk to him. But he goes off to do something and leaves his wallet on the table there near the wicker chairs. So she's about to snoop in his wallet when Rosa comes up behind her and tells her not to do that. And then later we see Rosa and Santana at the La Mesa, and Rosa's really upset with Santana for snooping through Cece's things.
And I'm assuming to a certain extent Rosa's attitude is that this would very much endanger her job and her standing in the family if Santana were to steal something or to be caught rifling through Cece's stuff. I'm assuming that's part of the reason she's so upset, apart from having very rigid values. Because it does seem like I think most mothers would be empathetic to their daughters wanting to find their young child that they gave up at a young age. So
at one point Santana says, you sound like Dad.
Yeah.
And Rosa said, well, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So now Cece had no real storyline of his own today, but he just popped up in several other people's ones. He calls Kelly at one point to tell her that the Duke and Duchess of Exeter are in his office, and they're going to have lunch, and they want Kelly to join them. And she, of course, has plans to bid on that horse secretly for him. So she says, no, I've got secret plans, and I can't tell you what they are.
Yeah.
So then she goes off to the stables and immediately runs into Joe.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe's shocked to see her there, but then immediately realizes that Dominic set that up.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly, of course, thinks that Joe sent her the note, and Joe shows her the telegram from Dominic, but she says, well, you could have sent this to yourselves. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, Kelly does mention that she heard about the fire and hopes his mom's okay. But then, she's upset that she thinks he tricked her, and then he decides to just mention that he loves her and that he's looking for the real killer. So he's still not buying that. But then after he leaves, she seems very confused by, I guess, her feelings for him.
Yeah. Plus, really, the whole thing has been a bit of a bummer for her because she missed out on a nice lunch with the Duke and Duchess of Exeter to go to this meeting, and she thought she was going to buy this great present for her dad, and that turned out to be a red herring, so she didn't get that out of it either. And she had to meet with Joe, who she's been trying to avoid. So she didn't really get much out of this meeting, I think.
I think it's possible the horse still actually is up for auction.
It is possible.
Maybe we'll find out tomorrow. And then Joe arrives at the Lockridge house to start his new job.
Mm-hmm.
And Augusta keeps flirting with him. And there's a lot of double entendres there about his duties.
Yeah.
And then she thinks to celebrate they need champagne. He says, well, I'm just a hired hand, and as well as you that we're celebrating, not your job. So she forces the champagne down his throat, basically, pouring it into his mouth. So
I think it's going to be interesting to see how this how this evolves, because on the one hand, she's been trying to keep this away from Lincoln, and Lincoln's been very upset whenever Warren suggested that their mother might be having relations with Joe Perkins. And yet now Joe Perkins is basically going to be practically living at their house and obviously being a personal assistant of some kind to their mother. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the tensions between Lincoln and Augusta sort of unwind in this. I don't think Augusta can really hide her relationship with Joe Perkins from her daughter if that's what she wants to do.
No, and I think Minx too.
Is not going to be happy.
She rarely leaves the mansion, I would think. Well, no, she was out in a limo earlier, but she's got to be immediately suspicious when Augusta hires Joe. So I think we'll see some hopefully amusing scenes there.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, Lionel will hear about it at some point.
Yeah.
We'll see if we see Lionel in the near future. And that's it for today. We'll see you again tomorrow after episode 14.
And maybe we should do a little research to see if the Duke and Duchess of Exeter really exist.
Are real people.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I'll put that on my notes.
Okay.
All right.
See you tomorrow.
Hi, welcome back to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara Week 3.
Hello.
We've watched episode 14, original air date August 16th, 1984. So, Lincoln and Tad awake, still on the couch where they fell asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And Danny and Jade are in Danny and Ted's apartment wondering what happened. They show up eventually in the apartment. And they get interrogated by Jade and Danny, but they don't reveal too much.
It looked pretty innocent to me, but they did definitely spend the night together.
Yeah. And then Peaches decides she wants to teach Jade and Lincoln how to fan dance.
It's her gift
That's her gift
to the teens for helping her out.
Yeah. So Lincoln has to basically go back to Santa Barbara, but she teaches Jade.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Santana has come up with a new plan. Tells Rosa that she's going to be nice to Cece. And Rosa's wondering what that's about.
I think vinegar hasn't worked to get Cece to reveal where her son is, so now Santana's going to try honey.
So I got the idea in my head that is it possible she's going to try and marry Cece so that she can get her son one way or the other?
Or at least butter him up a bit so he'll reveal a little more information.
So she goes to talk to Cece. He's gruff right at the beginning, but he
Yeah.
quickly turns around with her new tactic. She goes, "Oh, this was a big mistake. If I'd wanted to do something, I should have done it 5 years ago, and it's best for Brandon if I just leave him alone."
He's working out when she first comes in, and he's doing hammer curls in a very awkward way. I would have expected a billionaire to have a personal trainer to show him how to do them properly.
Well, it seems to be a brand new room that we've
Yeah,
never
we
seen
haven't
before,
seen that
with
room.
some weird art in it and workout weights. And yeah, I don't know what to call that room in my notes.
No.
So we'll see if they give it a name. But everyone seems to be in that room for the whole episode. It's now
Must
the
be a
main,
new set.
the exciting new place for people to go. So then Mason gets wind that Cece suddenly has changed his attitude towards Santana, and he's trying to find out from Santana what happened, but she's not giving away anything.
No, I thought one interesting thing with this whole change in approach that Santana's taken is up until this point, we've seen Santana wearing these vivid reds and oranges and these really bright, fierce colors. And in fact, that forms a little bit of the flirtation Peter attempts with her in the last episode, where he's commenting on her bright shirt and how he would like her to decorate the hotel in that color. Whereas now that she's taking a new approach, she's wearing blues and very much more sort of cooler, more sedate tones.
I didn't notice that. That's a good point. In the hospital, Joe comes to visit Cruz. Peter tries to stop him at first, but Cruz is adamant, and turns out they're old friends, and Cruz really likes Joe, and he's like, "How was jail?"
Yeah,
He doesn't
yeah.
seem all that upset that Joe
He's
was
not
in jail.
fazed
He
by
said,
that
"Oh, I
at
spent a
all."
night in jail in some place once." So yeah. So I think he's another ally of Joe, and Joe later runs into Tony, and she's, a fan of his too. So they plan on having dinner together.
Yeah.
And he mentions that he's got a job with Augusta, and later Tony's like, "Oh, Kelly, you should have dinner with me and Joe."
Yeah.
And it's like, "What are you talking about? Why are you having dinner with Joe?" And Peter's, still skulking around at the hospital. And he says, "Oh, we got to get rid of that guy." And Tony says, "Oh, it's going to be a lot harder now that he has a job."
Yeah.
So that's how Peter finds out that Joe is working for Augusta, and he runs to tell Cece, and Cece tells Peter that he should have a talk with Augusta. So now we have both Tony and Cruz are fans of Joe. So, when he first came to town, he seemed to have nothing but enemies. But we're seeing now that seems to be isolated to the Capwells and his father.
Yes. And it was interesting in that scene between Tony and Kelly, and you could see Tony was just biting her lip to tell Kelly a little bit about some of the women who have been visiting Peter while he's been convalescing and that sort of thing. So you can tell that Tony is not a fan of Peter's, and either by default or on his own merits, she's much more of a fan of Joe.
So Cruz Castillo, who's accepted the job at the Capwells, is moved into the Capwell mansion, into the weird workout room.
Yeah.
Which has a table where Rosa can bring him lemonade. And so Tony and Rosa are, spend the day attending to him in that room. And Cece says he can stay as long as he needs to. So that's part of his job offer, I guess. And then I think the newspaper... someone's reading the newspaper and jokes that they plan on renaming Santa Barbara Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
Which is funny. And then he gets a chance to chat with Santana, and they're flirting, and Santana says, "Oh, I hear you're a real ladies' man." And Cruz's response is, "I think it's healing me just to look at you."
He's a real player.
Yeah, so Santana was just a kid when he left town, I guess.
Yeah.
So he's hasn't had to interact with her in this way yet. So
And she's not taking it either, by the way.
no, I mean
No.
she's kind of flirts like a little bit. Like I think she deflects his things in a flirty way, but she's not gonna jump in. I think she's focused on Cece at this point because that's her main goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So later, it turns out Tony can't make dinner with Joe, but he asks about Kelly. I mean, I think Tony agrees with him that she doesn't think he's guilty.
Yeah.
And then he asks about whether Kelly thinks she's guilty, and I think she says she's not sure. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she mentions that Kelly thought about him a lot in the early years.
Yes.
I guess before Peter swooped in. So that's an interesting thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Joe shows up for work at Augusta's, and he's got some random handyman things to do. It's like sanding some wood and painting it, and Augusta's just flouncing around, drinking and in a bikini and moving around.
Yeah,
Joe.
She's very, very minimally dressed in this episode. Just with a bikini and a little gold chain around her waist, and that's about it.
So she keeps making innuendos about different jobs he could do, but he's actually doing handyman stuff and working on baseboards and things. And at one point, Minx comes in and says, "Stop that racket!" and she interrogates him. She recognizes him as Joe Packins.
Mm-hmm.
And she interrogates him, and I think she believes that he's
I
not
think
guilty.
she likes Joe.
Yeah, she asks him point blank if he killed Channing, and he says no. And she asks again in a slightly different way, just to see. And I think she asks, "Oh, did you have any female companionship in prison?" So Augusta answers, and seems a bit annoyed that Minx has spotted him, but Minx says she's got several things in mind for him to do, and Augusta says he's too young for you. So it was a fun day first day on the job, I think, for Joe.
Yeah.
And then he runs into Warren as well, and they know each other, and Warren has a bit of a thing with Augusta about, can't believe you've moved him in here, and with all the gossip and everything. So.
My feeling is with the Warren thing is that he's not thrilled about Joe being there because, Joe's being convicted of a crime and so forth. But I actually think he's a little more disgusted with his mother's wayward ways than, I think his reaction would be the same if it was anyone else as well.
Mm-hmm. So when Joe goes away for the night, actually he gets a message from Dominic and rushes off. Peter arrives, and he comes in guns blazing. Augusta got to get rid of Joe. She immediately counters with, "Were the charges ever dropped against you?" Moral turpitude, I believe it was. So I guess apparently Peter's got some history at the school.
That's right.
That he works at, or has now quit from. So it's not just Kelly that was a student that he went after. I guess he's got a history with the students. I mean, that school seems kind of lax. I don't know.
Well, I was thinking as this was playing out that it is interesting to me that CC, who has at his disposal the services of an entire detective agency, and probably has most of the city of Santa Barbara in his pocket, did not thoroughly investigate Peter before bringing him into the family and giving him all of these, wonderful things for marrying Kelly. So,
but Mason seems to
be on him.
At least some of the things.
Yeah.
So.
But I would just have thought CC would be a lot more proactive about that too.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know how much CC knows and why he's not that worried about it. So, then Peter, we come back later and we see Peter having a drink, and then they pull out and he's having a drink with Augusta, and it turns out that he and Augusta have had a thing for years.
They have a history.
And that's how Warren managed to get through physics, apparently.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting twist,
And Augusta says something quite interesting at the end of that scene. She says something about Peter being just like her, and she recognizes one of her own. And it seemed to me the show was sort of setting the two of them up as being, if not outright villains, then definitely two of the darker, more, I don't know, destabilizing forces on the show.
If my memory is correct, Augusta does something really terrible next week. So.
Oh boy!
So yeah, they're still two of the lead suspects for killing Channing. So that's interesting. Now Joe meets Dominic and thanks him for setting him up with Kelly. Then he feels that went relatively well. And then Dominic has lots of new inside information on the Capwells. First of all, they're having a party on the yacht tomorrow, and everyone will be out of the house. And Joe says, well, I hear Cruz is living there, or recuperating there, so Cruz and possibly a nurse are going to be in the house. And Dominic thinks, oh, that's worth the risk. And comes up with the alarm code and tells him where in the basement the alarm panel is and how to turn it off. So
Dominic seems to know a lot about the Capwells. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting. Now you had some theories about who Dominic was.
Well, just some early theories, because obviously I don't know much yet. But I wondered if, obviously Dominic knows a lot about the Capwells, so I wondered if maybe Dominic is a character connected to the Capwells that we haven't seen yet. So maybe Eden, even the other sister who we haven't met yet. I think Dominic is a woman, just because they're fairly small and seem to be a fairly light boned person. The other theory I had, which is a lot wackier, was that maybe Dominic was a split personality of Kelly. And I know that sounds weird, but remember, this is a soap opera, and eventually a lot of soap operas get to split personalities, identical twins, exorcism, that sort of thing. So the only reason I think that's not plausible is because this show is so early on in its run. It seems like that sort of stuff comes on when they're a lot longer and more desperate for ratings. But so that was a thought, that maybe Dominic is an alter ego of Kelly's, and Dominic shot Channing because he was trying to prevent the elopement, and that Kelly is dissociated from that personality. So that was my other wacky theory.
Those are two really good theories, and they are in the spirit of things that happen on Santa Barbara. So,
okay. See, I didn't know that.
They're both quite reasonable if you've seen 8 years of it. So yeah, those are great. I'm glad you're getting into the mindset that we need for this show. So that is it for episode 14. So week 3 wraps up with episode 15, which we will watch on August 17th, 35 years after it originally aired. And then we're going to have a spotlight on, and I'm just trying to work out who we'll do a spotlight on, because I don't want to miss
choices.
Don't want to miss any of the minor characters that are coming and going if they're interesting. And I don't want to do them too late, like if they leave and then months later.
Yeah.
So we will see. By the time we record episode 5, I'll know who the spotlight will be on. So join us later for episode 15.
See you later.
This week's spotlight is on Virginia Mayo. Virginia Mayo was born Virginia Clara Jones on November 30th, 1920, daughter to newspaper reporter Luke Jones and his wife Martha Rautenstrauch Jones. From the age of 6, she attended an acting school run by her aunt, as well as learning dance. After high school, she started acting and dancing professionally, and appeared with performer Andy Mayo. By 1941, she was known as Virginia Mayo, and appeared on Broadway. In the 1940s, she signed a contract with MGM Film Studios. She was married to actor Michael O'Shea from 1947 until his death in 1973. They had one daughter, Catherine Mary. She auditioned for the part of Lisa Douglas in Green Acres, but lost the role to Ava Gabor. She starred in numerous movies in the 40s and 50s, including The Story of Mankind, in which she played Cleopatra alongside the Marx Brothers, Hedy Lamarr, Agnes Moorehead, Vincent Price, and Cesar Romero. She appeared on television from the 1950s through the 1990s in shows such as Burke's Law, Night Gallery, Police Story, and as Peach's Delight in 12 episodes of Santa Barbara in 1984. After Santa Barbara, she played herself on Remington Steele and The Naked Truth. Virginia Mayo passed away on January 17, 2005, at the age of 84.
Hi, welcome back to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara Week 3.
Hello.
We watched episode 15 on August 17th, 2019, and we're back home from our vacation to record the commentary.
Mm-hmm.
This episode was all over the place. People were jumping back and forth, so the summary is a bit longer than usual. First, Dominic called Joe to give him more details about disabling the alarm at the Capwell mansion.
Yeah, so Joe can give it another try.
Then Augusta asked Peter for $100,000 to get Joe Perkins out of town. So they talked about their past a bit.
We found out that Augusta needs a bit of money, which is something that Peter picked up on right away. So she's actually shown a little bit of a vulnerability there, I think.
She said, unlike the Capwells, the Lockridges don't have as much money as they used to.
Mm-hmm.
Peter tells Kelly later that Augusta didn't promise to get Joe out of town, so Kelly knew about the plan to get Augusta to fire Joe.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. So it makes me wonder if Kelly is just as anxious to get Joe out of town as Peter. I mean, the whole thing seemed very driven by Peter. Kelly's been saying over and over she doesn't want to see him. But this is sort of the first indication that she feels so strongly about it that she would actually be willing to get behind driving him out of town.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, if you remember, there's going to be a big party on the Capwell yacht tonight.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going to give Joe his opportunity to get into the Capwell mansion. So on the yacht, Cece is directing all the decorations.
Yeah.
And he tells Santana that everything she did is wrong.
Yes, and you can see, Santana is a fairly strong, fiery woman. So you can see her sort of biting her tongue and trying not to say anything that is going to annoy Cece. She's really trying to stick with her idea of honey rather than vinegar to get her son back. So
and I think
she doesn't say too much.
Cece might be testing her to see if this is all an act.
Yeah, I think so too.
So she knows that he knows that she may be putting on an act. So
yeah.
So she seems to have passed that test. Mason comes in and goes, "Oh, everything looks great." Now this is in the next scene, so maybe she has made some modifications because the room they were in didn't look quite as garish as the one that we saw her with Cece.
Yes.
I couldn't really tell what changes were made decoration-wise without comparing them.
Like a lot of nautical flags on the ceiling. Apart from that, I couldn't tell either.
So I guess he asked Santana what she's planning to do. She says she's going to go home, have a bath. So Mason goes and calls his date, or calls his secretary to cancel his date.
We assume that's the date that he had before, don't we? That
he said the name, it sounded like the same.
Yeah, the one that Cece had so strongly disapproved of at the last party they threw.
So maybe Mason's thinking he could come up with someone Cece would disapprove of even more, because he later calls Santana while she's in the bath to ask her to go to the party with him.
Yeah.
And she agrees.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Maybe she's thinking, either Mason or CC could be the pathway to getting her son, or seeing her son at least.
Yeah, I think she's just willing to try different options at this point without raising anyone's suspicions or hackles.
Mm-hmm. Only Rosa really knows, her full intent.
Yes, that's right.
So Cece then races back home, thinking everything's underway. I guess he's going to get changed for the party and whatever. So he's chatting with Cruz and says he didn't really know that Cruz knew Joe.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously he's found out that from Peter that Joe was visiting him at the hospital. And he says, oh, yeah, he was 2 years younger than me in school, but we played football together.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this helps work out the timeline of how old everyone is. So
Mm-hmm.
he's about 2 years older than Kelly and Joe are now.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting. So they went to the same school, still assuming that wasn't Lyman Prep. So,
But it did seem to me, and I guess it was the last episode, that Cruz maybe knew Peter a little bit. Did you get that impression?
I don't recall. Did they say that they knew each other? Possibly.
I don't think they liked each other much upon seeing each other. I don't think Cruz really cared much for Peter, but maybe I'm reading stuff into it. But he's definitely very much Team Joe in this situation. They've got a long history together.
Yeah, I don't know. I might have made some notes as to whether they knew each other during that hospital scene last time.
Mm-hmm.
So then, later, next time we see Cruz, Kelly's hanging out on his bed, and Dr. Tony's by the bedside, and
Yeah.
they're chatting about what a ladies' man he is,
Yeah,
and
teasing him a little bit.
trying to figure out who's going to date. I mean, it seems like Tony's single, so
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's something she's thinking about. And then they leave, and Tony tells Kelly that she managed to have dinner with Joe,
Mm-hmm.
after all, and that all they did was talk about her.
Which doesn't sound like a really fun date to me.
So Tony's team Kelly and Joe,
Yeah,
just like Sally,
yeah.
maybe not as obsessive. Then later, Mason goes to visit Cruz, and he gets told off.
Yeah,
He says,
Cruz gives him an earful.
what have you done to investigate the people that tried to shoot Joe when he was on the bus? And what are you doing to investigate those two thugs that attacked him? And
What about that little bombing incident at Joe's home that almost killed his mother? What are you doing about that?
so it almost makes me think like Cruz is going to take matters into his own hands
Yeah.
and start investigating all those things himself if Mason's not going to do that. So
Yeah, Cruz seems very, very much a proactive person who could even tip over into vigilantism in certain circumstances.
I think he makes it clear to both Mason and Cece that he believes Joe. So
Yeah, he does.
I mean, the obvious question is, aren't they concerned that someone who killed a family member could be out there if it's not Joe?
Yeah.
But, I mean, that would be something Cruz could ask.
It does sound in this episode as well, just going back to his conversation with CC, that Cruz is willing to sacrifice this great job that CC has offered him to defend Joe. Because CC almost, rescinds that. I don't know if he fully rescinds it, but he's definitely not quite as enthusiastic about Cruz working for him at this point, with him so fervently defending Joe.
And I think after just being thrown a ticker tape parade on the cover of the paper,
Yeah.
Cruz doesn't need to take any job from CC.
No, exactly.
So he can do whatever he wants.
And he knows that he saved CC's oil rigs.
Mm-hmm. He
And
could just as
apparently no
easily
one
come
else
in
could
as a
have done that.
consultant next
Yeah,
time,
exactly,
right? Without
exactly.
being CC's employee. So.
He's probably one of the few people who could speak to CC that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, that's interesting. Everyone else, CC's got sort of power over everyone else.
Yeah.
Lincoln comes back from L.A. Augusta doesn't seem to suspect
No,
anything about Ted Capwell, so that's good.
I think that Lincoln's a little bit taken aback to find Joe there.
Yeah, and they do kind of know each other, like, to see each other. She knows
Yeah.
it's Joe. Trying to figure out what school she may have gone to. Maybe she went to the same school as Joe and Cruz, and would have been at least 5 years behind them, I think. So,
But so far, I mean, I imagine what's maybe going through Lincoln's mind a little bit is that this is actually supporting what Warren's been saying about their mom, which she didn't want to believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then Augusta shows up while Joe is trimming the hedges near the pool, and she's ready for a swim and invites him to go in. And he's worried about what if Lakin comes back.
Yeah.
So Lakin's clearly gone out again. And then Augusta says, why don't you put on one of Lionel's swim trunks in the pool house? It should fit you if you pull the string tight enough. So that's
a little dig at her husband.
At her hubby's
Yeah.
tummy, I guess. And then Joe decides he doesn't want to, but she says, I can be very angry if people don't do what I say. So he jumps into the pool with all his clothes on.
Yeah.
And swims up to her and comes up really close to her. So I don't know if he's planning to take up her other offer. And
they seem to be pretty close in that scene.
And then the next time you see them, they're in a totally different
Yeah.
room, and you have no idea
So
what
we don't
went
know
on.
what they did or didn't do.
There was a pool house there.
Yeah.
I don't know. So yeah, it's all kind of weird. What with Kelly?
Yeah.
So then she says that she doesn't like Peter. So that just comes out of nowhere. But
Yeah.
And then they talk about Kelly, and Augustus, seems to be like everyone else. So are you still hung up on Kelly?
Yeah. Which, I think is actually a fairly valid point that people are making.
So
it's not romantic.
She reveals to him that Peter did ask her to fire him.
Yeah.
And he also asks how things are going with finding the real killer. And he lets some things slip, and she pushes a bit, and I think she gets the idea that he's planning something today against the Capwells, and maybe she puts things together with the party going on the yacht that he's gonna try and sneak into the house.
Yeah.
She says, "Are you worried about being arrested or whatever, or losing your parole?" But he says you've got to take some risks. So,
do you though? Really, when it's your parole at stake?
I know, because if there's evidence around, someone else could gather it.
Yeah.
With a warrant. Well, especially now that Cruz is in town.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Cruz might be a better option for getting investigating done without risking your parole.
I can't say my impression of Joe is that he's really the brightest light, having watched the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, that seems to be.
I mean, not that I wish him ill, but he does seem to create a lot of problems for himself.
Then Peter and Augusta meet again. At one point they meet, at one point they have a call. And they talk about his past, and she presses him on his inappropriate relationships with students, and that she says he doesn't really love Kelly, just loves the money, but he says, no, I fell in love with Kelly the first day she walked into my classroom.
Which is not creepy at all, because she would have been a teenager.
Yep. I guess that doesn't find it too disturbing. At least she
I
doesn't.
think Augusta knows him. I don't think she's surprised by that admission at all.
So they argue a bit about the money. She says he could get it from the Capwells, etc. And she's quite adamant she needs the $100,000, and that she can tell the whole town about all of his affairs, including theirs, if she doesn't get the money. So
I'd be interested to know what exactly she needs it for. Whether it's her day-to-day expenses, why it has to be precisely $100,000, just out of interest. As you say, it just sort of comes out of nowhere.
Minx seems like the kind of person who probably has a secret bank account, and she just wouldn't dare to ask Minx for the money.
Yeah, I kind of get the feeling Minx holds a lot of the purse strings in that house.
Yeah, because that's the Lockridge house, right? So
Yeah.
that's her house.
Yeah.
Augusta's just a unwanted house guest, really, for her.
Yeah. I mean, she probably only puts up with Augusta because she likes Lincoln, and, for Lincoln and Warren's sake, possibly.
Now, finally, at the party on the yacht, Santana is being nice to Cece, and she says that she'd always considered him like a second father.
So she's really laying it on thick.
And Mason is still snooping around as to exactly what's going on with them. What was the animosity last week, and now why they being so nice to each other.
Yeah,
So.
he knows there's some secrets there, and he would like to know what they are, I think.
Meanwhile, in Hollywood, Danny and Ted practice stunt fighting for an audition that they've spotted in the paper.
Mm-hmm.
So that's comedic an interlude in the show.
Yeah.
And Jade is briefly with them, and then she goes on an audition. And in the audition waiting room, runs into a guy who is good friends with a French producer who's made a lot of movies that Jade says that she's never heard of any of them. And it's quite funny the way she puts them down.
Yeah.
They also have vaguely sexy sounding titles, so Jade doesn't really cotton on to that.
Yeah, I suspect this is probably porno or something close to it. That's my guess right now at this point. And I did think it was a little weird that this guy who's just in the casting room, I assume trying to get a part as an actor maybe, suddenly is offering Jade these opportunities. And you have to think, if it's a really legitimate producer with really legitimate acting jobs, why this guy, who's such great friends with him, is schlepping around in a casting room. You know, why would he need to do that? So it just seems kind of shady, the whole thing, to me.
These are exactly the kinds of things everyone was expecting when Jade said she was going to go to Hollywood.
Yeah,
so
I guess
she seems to be walking right into one situation like this after another.
Yeah.
So, she takes his card, and back at the apartment, she's very excited about, waiting for the phone to ring. So she thinks this sounds totally legit, and
yeah,
Danny and Ted didn't seem to have noticed anything amiss yet.
No,
so.
No.
One thing I forgot to mention during Joe and Augusta's talk was that when they were talking about Kelly, she says, "Oh yeah, she's very sweet, isn't she? She sort of sticks in your head like molasses sticks in your throat."
It's not entirely a compliment.
And then Augusta also says at one point, whoever killed Channing must have been a guest of the party or a crasher.
Oh, interesting.
So that makes me wonder, was she at that party? And if so, was she
a
guest or a crasher?
I didn't actually catch that.
She probably wouldn't have been in the opening scene, of the show where they showed everyone there, because we really only saw Mason, Phillips, Santana, Cece, I think, and Channing in the front room, but we saw a ton of extras in the back, and I'd be surprised if they put all the cast, back there. They weren't expecting people to go through it with a VCR. Probably when the murder gets revealed, we'll probably see a lot more about who was where at the various times, who may have been there that wasn't expected to be there, and who was there, and what they might have witnessed. So.
Yeah, in a way she's, maybe not entirely stating the obvious, but when you think about it, of the different groups of people who could have killed Channing, if it's not guests or gate crashers, it would have to be family or employees. So there's really only 4 categories of people who could have killed him.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're going out on a limb and, talking about mercenaries or something like that.
Mm-hmm. I think, that was just another opening line she's giving Joe, just in case he knows something that he hasn't told her, that maybe he'll blurt something out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So Joe manages to get into the Capitol basement, and the alarm system seems very complex. He not only has to punch in the code, but then he has to pull back that panel and short circuit another 2 parts of it, and then cut another wire.
So they have a very complex security alarm system, but apparently not many guards or dogs or anything like that around the property.
At least Augusta has a dog. So.
Yeah.
But there's a panel in Cruz's room that starts flashing red when Joe cuts the wire. Cruz doesn't notice it, but that's a bit of a warning that maybe all's not right with the disabling of the security. So he gets upstairs, and floorboard creaks as he passes by Cruz's room. For a second, Cruz gets out of bed and almost goes to sleep, but then he gets back into bed.
Yeah.
So, and then Joe makes it to Channing's room, puts the key in like last time, turns the key. It does not set off the alarm.
Yeah.
and he opens the door. So
And
all
this
seems
is a
to be very
very
well.
long, slow sequence, too, by the
Mhm.
way.
And so everything seems good.
Yep.
And then Augusta phones Cece and says, in a French accent, someone has jumped over your gate and is breaking into your house.
So now we know how she's going to earn her $100,000.
Yes, I think if Joe gets put back in jail, she'll make the case that she earned her 100,000.
Yeah,
So.
and she can do it fairly cleanly, actually, because Joe has, unfortunately, put himself in this situation.
Well, Dominic warned him not to trust Augusta.
Yes.
And I think he told her too much.
Yep, I think so, too.
Anything else happened this week that we want to talk about?
Not that I can think of. We did. You did do a little bit of research on Lionel Richie to find out how deep the Lionel Richies would be that Sally would be bathing in.
Pool that Sally wanted. Well, he only had 2 albums out as a solo artist, 82 and 83 by this point, although perhaps she's counting the Endless Love soundtrack, which he would have been on as well.
He had had a fairly long career, I guess, with the Commodores before that. But
maybe she's gone and gotten his back catalog as well,
Yeah.
just to pad out the 3 albums she does have.
Yeah, seems like a shallow.
And, on a technical note, for this week, we adjusted the microphone audio down to an 8 from a 10. So you probably won't have to crank it down as much this week as in the past.
It's a work in progress, people.
Yeah. So, coming up, well, we'll find out if Joe escapes. Maybe Cruz will help him, hide him under the bed or something.
Yeah.
Maybe Dominic is skulking around somewhere, could help him. Party at the yacht probably will peter out. And Jade will probably end up in another sticky situation.
Yes.
And, maybe Joe will inch forward to finding the killer. Hopefully he'll try to engage Cruz's services so that he
I think
stop
Cruz
doing these
seems
unwise
a bit
things.
more on the ball than Joe, so that would probably be a good idea.
All right, that wraps it up for week 3 of Santa Barbara. Join us again next week for week 4 as Misha and Dianne watch Santa Barbara. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara was recorded in front of a live studio audience.